What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here with a video about minions, gold, and experience, specifically golden experience from minions, and hopefully some useful advice for you in how to play the game better once you know how everything works under the hood. As with any video like this, the topic can go on forever. There could be a part 2 or a part 3. This is not going to be 100% inclusive of everything that could ever happen in the world of minions and such, but hopefully it's going to be a really, really good first step, and maybe there's more you want to explore, or there's another part I can do to this video or something else. But first things first, we need a pop quiz. How much experience does it take to level up? How many stats do you gain each time you level up? For that matter, which stats do you gain? What's the gold value of those stats, and thus the gold value of a level? You might know that it takes more experience to go from level 8 to 9 than it does from, say, 3 to 4 or any earlier level. You might not know that you gain more stats 8 to 9 than 3 to 4. So then here's another question. How much does the gold value change as levels increase? And since it takes more experience to reach higher levels and champions gain more stats when they do so, which way does the XP to stat conversion go? So, how about another question? Virtually all champions gain health, armor, magic resist, attack damage, and attack speed. So, does an 80 carry gain more DPS or more durability from leveling up? What about for a mage, a fighter, or a tank? For that matter, exactly how different are champion stat scalings? I mean, really, how much more durability does the average melee champion get compared to, say, the average range champion, like a marksman or a mage? How much gold would you say a champion gains just from leveling 17 times? How much that would be in auto-attack DPS? How much that would be in durability? We can keep going. What about minions? Minions are worth both experience and gold. You can't really get gold from them without gaining experience by default, but you can, of course, miss last hits and still gain XP without gaining gold. So then there's a player skill vector. Stronger players are better at last hitting, meaning their gold to XP ratio increases. Generally, more skilled players have more items than levels, and conversely, less skilled players have more levels than items. So is there even a magical middle ground where the two are in sync, or does that even matter? We've got a lot to talk about here, right? There's a lot of factors that go into talking about minions and gold and XP and all this stuff. Ultimately, I'm hoping to inspire you to reflect on how you spend time in the game, and there might be some self-improvement as we dig into the important bits and look at optimizing gold and XP gains as other parts of the game also compete for our attention. So let's start with some basics. Here's a look at the required experience per level, which is in blue, superimposed on the amount of stats gained on a level up, which is in red. The upshot here is that experience is much, much more valuable early in the game. Even though stat growth scales up, it doesn't scale up nearly as fast as experience requirements do. And this is just talking about baseline stat gains as a percentage. We're kind of normalizing here using level 10 as an inflection point to make the graph a bit easier to read. Some champions scale with level a bit harder than others, like say Tristana, who gains attack range, and some don't really care, like Jinx, who maxes everything important by level 9, and has pretty poor offensive stat growth otherwise. So how much this matters, it varies by champion, but the trend is still always true that it's better early and worse late. So what does that mean for you? Well, it means losing a minion wave means a lot more early game. One wave can frequently mean an entire level, or at least almost a full level, and that just isn't true later on. For reference, it takes 7 minions to reach level 2. It takes over 5 whole minion waves, complete with cannons in each one, to go from 17 to 18. It's almost 7 times the XP for less than twice the stat gains. Now, we can look at this a different way as well, okay? Because even though more technical stats are gained level by level, the total percentage power increase wanes. Here is the graph of our median champion's physical and magical durability and how it grows by level expressed in percentages. A 12 to 13% increase in durability from leveling to 2 wanes to a 7 to 8% level over level durability growth as time goes on. Surviving 12% more punishment before dying is definitely meaningfully different to surviving 7% more punishment. And again, it takes more and more XP to get this difference, and so by this measurement, it's even less and less value. So this is still kind of reinforcing what we think about. This leads into our next big point, which is that abilities. And it's one that we can't really fully measure here. So ability ranks are a really important part of leveling up as well. Of course, we know this, but sure, it's not hard to jot down health and armor scalings of a sample set of champions for use in this kind of information. But honestly, doing this for every ability is well outside of scope to try to, look at every single champion's ability scaling and most common skill order, and then use that to intuit some kind of like percentage how many Qs per E are you using and how much does it matter? And then using those level ups to like solve for pseudo ability power and ability haste from leveling up. Like that's just not happening. That's well out of scope of anything reasonable. Thankfully, we've got a shortcut because players are naturally going to max their most important abilities first. Not only do we go from not having W to having it because we hit level 2, and then not having E to having it by hitting level 3, we also have other important levels that are all really early, like ranking up our primary ability at 4, 5, and 7, and ranking up our ultimate at 6. Intuitively, we understand that, yeah, the first 7 levels mean a lot more than the other ones. It's pretty easy from that regard. So, and obviously there's really stark ones like level 6. I mean, the difference between a level 5 champion and 6 is honestly massive. The difference between 1 and 2 is massive. But again, we're talking about the first third of the levels in the game. This power of leveling up via ability ranks decays over time. And not just in terms of power gain per menu wave, but even in absolute power per level, which was at least debatable with base stats. Unlike base stats, which grow increasingly by level, the value of skill ranks decrease with level. Again, obvious spikes like ultimates at 6, 11, and 16, sure, but again, who cares if Vayne has rank 2 of Condemn? And this is something that we have come to know subconsciously, and it's why so many games seem to devolve into just sitting in mid lane to poke and prod 5v5 for minutes on end. I mean, after all, a team fight around Dragon or turrets are way more meaningful than, the comparison, which is what does getting halfway from 16 to 17 even do? I mean, literally, you gain nothing. It's also why being able to shove a minion wave into a turret before roaming in the early game is such a big deal. Because a kill is nice, of course, but losing the race to 6 means the exact same kill happens back onto you because of that level lead. This level lead breakpoint is much less likely to happen, or than even matter if it does happen at 30 minutes compared to 13 minutes. So ultimately, we can see why sitting in side lanes catching waves for the entire game and doing nothing else is obviously a losing play. The comparative value of catching every single wave simply goes down as the game progresses. Meanwhile, objectives spawn when they didn't exist before, or they're comparatively more fragile since turrets don't gain health, but certainly champions gain damage over time. The expected value of a gank or moving to a team fight goes up because you're gonna get more done with that time. It's also why vertical progression matters in a MOBA, because the fundamental variables in the equation, does ganking matter, change by the minute. Identifying roam and when that overtakes farm is a very critical skill in knowing what you can give up, and finding that inflection point is really valuable. So we've talked about a couple of downward pressures here, some pretty distinct ones. The stats we gain per minion wave go down with level, and the functional ability value does the same, but this is actually still insufficient. We have upward pressures that ask us to seek out minion waves, even if they are theoretically less valuable in a vacuum. Let's sidestep macro arguments in pushing waves. Splitting up the map and condensing it and all that kind of stuff. Let's just stay on topic about the value of waves themselves, as we have another cumulative graph of, again, the relative value of minions going down with level. So one of the core facets of League of Legends is that the map gets smaller over time. At the very start of the game, champions have the baseline movement speed, one rank and one ability, and the lanes meet as far apart as they possibly can. It's not only nearly impossible to leave one lane for another and then come back without losing something, it's also going to take a really long time to harvest the golden XP from those minions in the first place. All of those factors shrink with time. Champions buy boots, then they upgrade those boots. You'll notice that every single champion who can buy boots does so incredibly early. Most upgrade to tier 2 rapidly as well. And this isn't a balance oversight where boots are mistakenly overpowered for 11 years straight. This is an intentional design choice core to the genre. Think about the map layout. As soon as a single turret falls in a side lane and the minion waves move from equilibrium at the river and down to the next spot, the distance between that and the next lane gets shorter. For a defending player who's lost a turret, the distance between that income and their base gets shorter as well. And on top of that, champions rapidly gain damage, often in the form of devastating area of effect abilities and attacks that can just wipe out dozens of minions in a couple of seconds. So as you progress deeper into the game and the individual value of a minion wave gets relatively lower, we're not yet measuring the time required to harvest those minions. It takes level 1 Jax a while to knock down a minion wave, so long in fact that it'll probably take him over 30 seconds. The next wave is going to show up by the time level 2 arrives. By contrast, think about how long it'll take a level 12 Jinx with a Hurricane to kill a big minion wave with 20 minions in it. Yeah, the early game Jax is getting more per minion, but Jinx is farming, honestly, more stats, levels, and ability ranks per second. So, I mean, let's think about game context. Jax truly cannot afford to leave his lane at level 1 if it means sacrificing a wave outside of really extreme situations. And similarly, Jinx probably shouldn't be able to ignore 20 minions stacked up in the mid game either. It's relatively the same amount of loss, or maybe even more in the Jinx case. So despite these two downwards pressures with minions, ability ranks being worth less, the functional stat gain per minion shrinking, this is combated by champions getting better at harvesting minion waves and taking less time to do so. There are also two more upward pressures to talk about, which are on this graph here. First, cannons start spawning more rapidly over time. Initially, cannons spawn every third wave, and at 50 minutes, it becomes every other wave. At 25 minutes, it's a cannon every single wave. That's an eventual experience increase, as we can see in the red bar, of 20% per wave on average once you're at 25 minutes. Okay, not bad, but not good enough. The second one that we've been ignoring for the entire video so far is the actual gold earned from slaying minions until now, and so we can talk about this because while the levels per wave decrease with time, the items per wave increases. Not only do more cannons mean more potential gold, but the cannons themselves slowly increase from 60 gold every third wave to 90 gold just in the cannon every single wave. You take in those numbers, and there's a 56% increase in gold income per wave at 25 minutes compared to the first minute. So, obviously, a very big deal. So, we have to roll this all in together. And unfortunately, it is really difficult and varies even more by champion. Gold income scales with time. Stat gains and thus experience value scales with level, which is correlated with time, but it's still not a 1-to-1 ratio. So if we're going to convert champion XP to actual gold value, it's individualized by the champion itself, which means it's way out of scope of this video to do that for all 140 some champions, but we can at least look at our median champion, and we're using health, armor, magic resist, attack damage, and attack speed as the stats of value. The best I could do is remind you that the gold value per wave, again, increases by 56%, and the experience per wave increases by 20%. Doing some quick math, back of a napkin, the trend is gonna still be overall downward with time, though obviously not as harshly as the initial thoughts before we included raw gold in the metrics. But this sends us to one final point that again reinforces that players tend to make rational choices, even if they might not fully understand why. More specifically, this is something that pros do to a much better degree than non-pros. Let's start with a baseline assumption that catching a minion wave in a side lane is not ideally where a champion wants to be. Certainly it's valuable because gold and XP are valuable things to gain, but bot lane tier 2 is not where the Baron is spawning. It's a positioning tax that is paid in order to level up. So it makes sense for Rumble or Jinx or most other champions to run to a side lane and catch several waves of farm for the sole purpose of powering up. In general, splitting off is arguably a weak macro play, but must be done because of the income considerations. It rarely makes sense for supports to do so. Intuitively, this makes sense, but most players don't really practice habit very well. I mean, it's obvious when you look at the numbers, right? Jinx catching a wave pulls double duty. She gains plenty of both gold and experience by taking down 3 minion waves, and she does so rapidly because her offensive toolkit and AoE damage do so quickly. So consider a support Nabi trying to do the same. Well, she's out of position for longer because her damage is lower, and she's also less likely to last hit those minions, meaning her actual income is further lowered as well, which makes it obviously not a very good choice, and yet sometimes that still happens. Now let's take a quick aside and talk about experience that minions give out, which you can see somewhat on this graph here. Sharing XP among more than one champion functionally grants a 25% bonus in the total experience given. If one champ would earn 400 XP by killing some minions, having any number of teammates nearby would grant 500 XP shared equally among them, again split equally. All else being the same, sharing XP is a positive if done constantly. Not only is more experience being gained in total, but as we've talked about in this video, the value of experience means more at lower levels, which champions will be if sharing. The game rewards splitting XP equally among champs as much as possible, since funneling XP is relatively inefficient. We've talked about this the entire video so far. But as a recent topic implies, this can incur a macro cost. So what about supports just joining teammates just to watch minion waves crash? Outside of macro considerations like preventing a dive, this is actually still stupid. So again, consider the baseline macro expectations are be somewhere useful, right? That's where you want to be. Assuming a dive isn't coming, catching a wave under your tier 2 turret when Baron is spawning is not a useful location to be. So for the same time investment of Jinx catching bot lane, Nami could follow her and soak up XP by watching the wave die. But what does Nami gain, or more broadly, what does the team gain by doing this? And I want you to guess how much sort of total value the team gains from Nami watching a wave die. As a quick reference, we'll value experience at worth about 0.5 gold, as is true for most level 9 and higher champions, and assume that Jinx gets every last hit. So, what you would do is earn about 1100 experience and 600 gold from a triple stacked wave in the late game, which we're going to convert to 1130 total gold of value. That's the gain for the team if they pay the cost of being without a marksman for 40 seconds for Jinx to farm this. If Nami takes those same 40 seconds to follow Jinx and watch that XP to get the bonus XP share, we go from 1130 gold to 1265. It's under 12% as a gain. Because the raw gold in the minions is higher than the extrapolated gold in experience, a 25% bonus XP gain is really just not that important. This now references what we talked about earlier in the video. Skilled players that are good at last hitting more minions, they're better at, last hitting minions than unskilled players. Now, if Jinx missed every single one, then there would actually be a 25% gain in resources because it's only XP you're sharing and not gold that's only going one way. Suddenly the value of that wave is more just in the XP. This leads to a kind of ironic self-fulfilling prophecy. Supports in iron, bronze, and silver are actually a larger part of their team's total offensive and defensive power budget, since their teammates aren't last hitting as many minions and thus they have less gold. More of the team's power is in each individual champion's base stats and ability ranks, thus levels and experience is then a bit more likely to be correct for a support to share in XP of minions rather than playing for some other objective. Not to mention, again, all the coordination difficulties at lower elos. But as the skill of players increase, supports should be trying to deprioritize themselves because Nami showing up to watch minions die is only 12% as useful as in that first champion in the first place. Again, not very likely to be correct. This is not just limited to supports though. If your mid laner or jungler pulls off a successful gank, them staying in the bottom lane doesn't do anything of merit. You're losing 100% of a minion wave somewhere or a jungle camp somewhere in order to get an extra 12% of the minion wave you're at. Or 0% if there are already a second champion there, like a support. Again, map considerations like shoving in the minion wave or finishing a turret, those matter, and they may require you to stick around in a 3v0 or a 4v0, but the cost of this is always 100% of a minion wave somewhere else on the map, or 100% of your Baron pressure that would help keep your wards alive somewhere else on the map. And I really, 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 really want to reinforce this. Teams pay a huge opportunity cost of being down a champion in a useful location in order for them to gain resources somewhere else. A second champion going to share a wave is only 1/8 as good as the first champion doing this. Stacking up just to watch minions die together is almost never a good macro play on its own merits, whether it's a support or a Lee Sin following a rumble into top lane to do nothing else but watch XP. It is not a good source of your time or a good place to put it. However, as we touched on briefly before, we may be simultaneously over and under counting the value of experience, as it's honestly way too difficult to do it cleanly. Technically, armor or magic just go to waste against Cassiopeia or Talon in lane, and sometimes against entire team compositions. Nami gains about 175 gold per level in attack damage and attack speed that she's probably not going to use past level 7. But on the other hand, Morgana getting extra duration on Dark Binding or strength on Black Shield is possibly worth much more than the 161 gold she gets from these auto attack stats. So these points are not easily quantified in the same terms, and honestly, yeah, it's just not really possible. We're comparing apples to oranges, and while fruit absolutely can and should be compared, homology is still not the point of this video. So here's one final info dump to round things out. Almost ubiquitously, about 2/3 of the stats champions gain on level up that they care about are in durability. At the start, I asked you about how much damage a marksman gains from leveling up, and it's really not that much. A level 18 AD carry has about 2.5 times as much auto attack DPS as they do at level 1, not counting abilities. Yes, of course, the not counting abilities part is a big asterisk, but I mean, champs like Caitlyn, it's just their base stats for auto attack DPS. Their spells are distinct. Either way, bear with me. Mana users also get about 2.5 times the mana pool and regen combined at max compared to level 1. So pretty similar there for offensive tools. By contrast, most champions are between 4.5 and 5 times as durable at level 18 compared to level 1. So think back to the fact that champions gain more and more stats as they level, and think about how most abilities you care about stop improving at level 9 or level 13. And then think about the fact that that there's a big XP gain difference between a solo laner and a dual laner. The primary difference in the late game is almost exclusively just durability. Mid lane Lucian doesn't care about the rank of his W, and the attack damage and attack speed growth just really aren't that meaningful, all things considered. What he does care about are the health, armor, and magic resist gains that help him now survive team fights because he's level 17, not 14. Marksmen overall average about 2,800 gold in attack damage and attack speed gain by leveling 17 times. Mages average about 1,500 gold in total mana available, counting regen. Virtually all of them gain over 5,000 gold worth of health, armor, and MR via leveling. This number isn't much different from tanks, by the way. Our cohort of melee champs who intend to receive damage gain just 8% more gold in tank stats than marksmen, and only 5% more gold in tank stats than ranged mages per level. Indeed, most of the identity of those champions and how they function is their abilities and the items they buy to reinforce those abilities. Hopefully, this exploration was helpful. The value of minion waves generally diminishes over time, but by being able to reach and harvest them quickly, it's still important to catch most of them for a short amount of time. Still though, you do not need to be tied to minion waves in the late game and should instead ensure you're in the right place and macro-wise more often than not. Sharing a minion wave late game is generally a waste of time. And finally, one of the primary ways for a squishy champion to get tanky is to just gain levels, so, stay alive and catch minion waves. Most champs gain over 5,000 gold worth of tank stats just from leveling all the way to 18. One day there might be a part 2 of this video, probably titled The Gold Value of Gold, so stay tuned for that one. Until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.